Hello and welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour. I'm here with a very special guest, John Winn Miller, who is the author of a novel which recently released, I believe, The Hunt for Peggy C. It's a World War II maritime thriller. Anybody who likes this particular genre will love this movie. And welcome to the Gritty Hour, sir. It's an honor to have you.
Thanks. Thanks
So,
for having me. I
yeah,
appreciate it.
is this your first full-length novel?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It originally it was the screenplay that I wrote years and years ago, and when COVID hit, I had nothing else to do, but so I sat in my office and took some online courses and read some books, and just sat down and started writing. And it took me about 7 months. So for the first draft, the next few drafts took a lot longer.
Well, considering it's your first novel, you did win the Clive Cussler Adventure Writers Competition, which is a pretty good feat for your first outage.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was just a semifinalist, but that's out of several hundred, if not thousand writers. So it was quite nice.
It's still a feather in the cap, absolutely.
You better believe it. Yes.
Yeah. So I know you're not a maritimer. Is that the right word to use by trade? I'm just curious how you, I know there was some sort of dream that got you to start writing this. I'd love for you to explain.
It was very strange. Years ago, my daughter Allison and I, and my wife Marta, we were all watching some movie, and I can't remember what movie it was, but I kept saying, I know I can write a better screenplay than that. I just know it. And that night I had a dream. It sounds crazy, but it's true. When I woke up, I knew the first scene, I knew the last scene, and the name of the ship, the Peggy C. And that's all I knew.
Wow.
I have no idea where any of it came from. I have no experience whatsoever on a tramp steamer or in a U-boat. The biggest ship I've been on was a QE2, I think. So that's my entire experience on Maritime. So it was not a subject I would have picked. It sort of picked me, and I had read tons of World War II history over the years, and I had never read anything quite involving all of the pieces that I ended up putting in the novel. Anyway, I finished the screenplay, and like with the novel, I took video courses and read books. And both my daughter and my brother are in Hollywood. My brother, Harry, is a film editor, and my daughter, Allison, is now an actress on a TV show called A Million Little Things on ABC.
Oh, very nice. Congratulations.
So she's been out there for a while, and my brother was there. So I took the screenplay to LA and got some meetings and got a little bit of interest and got very positive feedback. I came in second in a writing contest for screenplays, so I was pretty encouraged. But Hollywood is let's talk, and I'll call you, don't call me. So nothing really happened. My brother and I and another friend who's a writer director named John Harrison, who won an Emmy for Dune on TV, on sci-fi. We wrote a TV series together called Wreckage, about a mythical or fabricated team of NSTB agents and FBI agents sent in as sort of a hot team to come in and investigate the worst potentially criminal wrecks, trains, planes, cruise ships, pipeline explosions. And we did get a bunch of meetings with that. And we got it, CBS Studios liked it, but then they said, how many planes can we blow up? And we kept trying to tell them, you don't have to blow up that many, because it's not just about things that blow up. It's pipelines, it's ships, it's planes that have peculiar problems, criminal corporate corruption. Um, I'd gotten that in my blood. I had the
Right.
stories. I knew how to write a screenplay pretty well. As a journalist for many years, I learned how to do uh, research and become an expert on stuff pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so when COVID hit, as I said, I decided, well, I've always wanted to write a novel. It's one of the reasons why I became a journalist was so I could learn how to write and
Mm-hmm.
actually have something to write about,
Right.
have some pretty exciting experiences. So that's kind of where it came from. It came out of a dream and then a nightmare, which was COVID.
Right.
So it
Right. But it is particular. You must have did a lot of research about uh, being a merchant mariner in during World War II, because there are particulars in the book. I think I told you before we started recording. I'm not done yet, but I do have it
yeah,
right in front of me.
good.
Um, so you must have done a lot of due diligence before you started putting pen to paper.
Yes, I got a bunch of books. I watched, there's a bunch of documentaries that you can watch. Uh, there are videos, videoed interviews with sailors and what they went through. There's online archives where I could actually get records of uh, every U-boat captain's log. I was able to read those to see
Mm-hmm.
because this is a chase across many thousands of hundreds, if not thousands of miles. And so I wanted all of the details to be completely accurate because I knew I'd get killed if they weren't. But I also enjoyed the research. I would discover stuff. And I go, oh, I didn't know that. Well,
Right.
how do you do that? Well, I would have to do a ton of research. Well, what do you call that? Or why is it called that? Like there's a term for one of the characters. It's called Donkey Man, and
Yes.
which I was completely unfamiliar with. It's not a derogatory term, although in the book it can be used as that. Uh, but it's just someone who operates the donkey engine that
Right.
lifts things. It's a small engine on the ship.
Right.
Uh, that so the person who operates that is sort of like a utility uh, sailor who does a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I did a ton of research,
Right.
and I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was doing, so I footnoted everything, just like I was writing a history.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't happy to say, he had a pistol. I wanted to know, well, what kind of pistol? What kind of submachine gun did the Nazis use? And what did it look like? And how many rounds did it have?
Right.
Uh, Not all of that ended up in the book, but I wanted to know because I just found it fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then after I had finished one of the drafts, I uh, my roommate in college had been in the Navy, so I sent it to him to read. And then I also hired a um, former chief petty officer on a submarine who's also a writer, a guy named Matt Zulu, who writes the On the Roof Gang series,
Mm-hmm.
which is a history. And I had him read it and correct any of the lingo or the technology that I got wrong.
Right.
And he was invaluable because there was some lingo that I never would have found out about. For
Mm-hmm.
instance, uh, when you say I, aye, Captain,
Right.
uh, you don't say that to just any old question because I means I understand and I will comply.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you just say I.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then the other thing he corrected me on is I had one of the characters whistling on the deck. He said, no, you never whistle on a ship because they communicate through the bosun's pipe, the little sharp wheel whistle that they blow the officers aboard and things like that. So you can't do that. So,
Right.
oh. And then I had an advanced reader who not only had been a submarine captain, but who had served in Europe and knew a bunch of U-boat captains. So he knew a lot about it and corrected a couple of technical things inside the U-boat that I had gotten wrong. Surprisingly, I hadn't gotten that many things wrong.
Right. Yeah.
Because if I wasn't sure about it, I left it out or I wrote around it, uh, because I want sailors and submariners and lay people to be able to read this and really know what it's like to be on those ships.
Yeah.
What it feels like, what the food is like, what it
Right.
smells like, the sounds that if you're on that ship, what do you hear?
Right.
Uh,
Well, the the research and your due diligence does reflect well in the book, because
Thank you,
it's
thank you.
almost it almost reads like a ship's captain wrote it. So
Yeah, yeah.
kudos to you for doing all that research, and
Thank you.
it does show up in the final product. There's an underlying morality in this book which I like. Um, if you could just tell our listeners the underlying premise of the book.
Right. So, if I were doing a movie, I would tell you the log line is an American smuggler struggles to rescue a Jewish family from Amsterdam
Right.
on his rusty cargo ship, which enrages his crew of misfits and sparks a long chase by a deranged U-boat captain bent on revenge.
Right.
So that is the basic premise. But then there's also uh, the captain, the American smuggler, is a guy named Jake Rogers. Uh, we learned that there's rumors that he fled America because of a murder. And he's been in Europe for years working on the Peggy C, worked his way up to become captain. And as part of that, as a smuggler, he becomes very cynical
Mm-hmm.
about. He thinks most soldiers are suckers, that they're just fighting for little pieces of ribbon, which he makes fun of because that's what Napoleon said.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it's amazing what you can get soldiers to do for little pieces of brightly colored ribbons, and so he makes fun of some of the soldiers, and he's like Rick in Casablanca. He's not going to get involved, and he's a smuggler, so he's doing stuff for money,
Mm-hmm.
and he smuggles this Jewish family out of Amsterdam for money, and it eventually turns into a love story, and
Right.
he starts doing things that are not in his best financial interest, but that he begins to have a sense of loyalty to a family, um, sense of kind of duty, even though he makes fun of some of the sailors who talk about honor and duty. So it's a gradual transformation from him, from this cynical, very shady character, to someone whose inner morals rise to the top, and he becomes uh, what his parents would have wanted him to become, something he didn't think he could be. Um,
He taps into his better angel. Yes.
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
he does. And the other thing I did with him is he's a big, rugged guy, tough taskmaster, but he almost never uses force. He uses his brains to think things out. He's very clever,
Mm-hmm.
and at one point he gets in a lot of trouble, and yet he's able to trick the Germans repeatedly with techniques that I actually got from other books, from history books. So a lot of the uh, things he did, and a lot of things that his nemesis, Captain Brower, the head of the U-boat captain, came from bits and pieces of other captains on other ships. Um, because again, I wanted it to be something that was realistic. I didn't want it to be so out there that, oh, no captain ever would have done that. Well,
Right. Right.
many of them did.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. I was going to ask you about one of the antagonists in the book, um, the captain of the U-boat.
right.
How you got into that. But before you started talking, would it be all right? I should ask you before we started talking if I shared to the people who watch us on YouTube your webpage.
Oh,
Would
absolutely.
that be
Yeah,
fine?
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I was going to ask you about the the U-boat captain is really what I'm
Right.
interested in, how that character developed.
Okay.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, you're there. Yeah, I don't know if you can
Yeah,
see your page there.
yeah,
So I just
yeah,
wanted to make sure that was up before you started
yeah.
delving into that character. So,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
well, originally his name was going to be Captain Bauer
Hmm.
because for alliteration reasons, they call him Bloody Bauer. Then when I started doing my research, I found out that there were actually three Captain Bowers who were U-boat captains. So I changed it slightly just to keep the alliteration. Brower uh, was his name, and his story again, it's very bizarre. There's a website, brilliant website called uboat.net.
Hmm.
You can go to that and read about every captain of every U-boat. You can read their logs. You can read about everything they shot down, about their weapons. So when I was trying to figure out a name, another name for this character, I started going through the list of captains.
Hmm.
And the first captain I hit uh, was a guy named Abel. And his story becomes part of my character's story. And then I take bits and pieces from other captains who I read about to make him he's evil, but he also has a sense of morality. So it's not like he's this deranged Nazi who's going to do everything. He actually thinks he's doing God's will,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
which a lot of it's a fanatical thing, but doing duty for the country, for religion, and a lot of the actions I have him do were things that either this Captain Abel or some others had done. Um, so I wanted him crazy, but I didn't want him to be so far out of the sense of reality that people would read about him and say, oh, well, you're just making a caricature.
Right.
Yeah, I
No, no,
tried.
he's definitely believable. Yeah.
And he's also very smart. He's a self-made man, worked his way up, was a lawyer by training, uh, grew up poor in Hamburg, and eventually made it to captain. He didn't and always play entirely fair in order to get there.
Hmm.
So that's where he came from. But also he needed kind of an arc in movies when you're writing a script, or I guess in novels too. You need a character arc. So they start in one place, they change, and then they end up as a different person by the end of the uh, book or the movie. The hero always ends up a better person. The villain typically doesn't really change all that much. In
Right.
fact,
Right.
my villain um, gets more and more fanatical, if that's a word, by the end of the book. And
Hmm.
again, I used a technique, a history that I had stumbled across, is that one of the things that made the Blitzkrieg work, particularly at the beginning of the war when the Nazis surprised everybody by coming through the Ardennes forest instead of through Brussels, is the tanks could move so fast and that the tank drivers didn't sleep for 3 days.
Hmm.
And the reason they didn't is they had what was called then tanker's chocolate. It was
Hmm.
chocolate laced with what now we would call crack cocaine.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so they stayed awake for days on end, made them, and they were really sharp. Of course, they would crash at the end of that. So my
Yeah.
character, because he's desperate, he knows he can't sleep. He's got to do this chase, uh, and so he picks up some Tanker's chocolate at a pharmacy, which was available then,
Right.
um, and starts taking these pills that that eventually affect his performance. But
Yes. He becomes obsessed with getting to Peggy C.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, he the Captain Rogers had tricked him uh, and absconded with four of his crew members who were a boarding party, and Brower has to get them back, otherwise his career's over.
Hmm. Yeah.
And he
Well, I don't want to
But
give too much away for two
yeah,
reasons. I want people to buy the book, and number
thank you.
two, I'm not done with the book yet.
I won't tell you how it ends.
But I am interested in the somatic. It reads, it's very cinematic when you read it, and I'm wondering, what did you have in your mind in that process, in the writing process? Did you have like
I,
a cinematic approach to it?
Oh, absolutely. Because it started out as a screenplay. Screenplays I liken to haiku. They're very short, they're
Mm-hmm.
very direct. There are a lot of implied things that you don't say, and they depend largely on visuals because you can't necessarily go into a character's brain. You can't tell the audience what they can't see.
Mm-hmm.
So I had written the screenplay, and it had to be very visual. And then when I started writing the book, I would take a scene from the screenplay and then describe it. And I wanted to use all five senses. I wanted you to see it, I wanted you to hear it, I wanted you to smell it, taste it, uh, feel the fear, feel the claustrophobia of being in a submarine.
And you do as you're reading it, actually. So
Yeah, good.
you
Thanks.
accomplished it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things, pieces of advice I'd seen was, don't use a lot of description. Well, I completely violate that because I give a ton of description,
Mm-hmm.
both of the technology and of the history.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when I finished the first draft, I realized, most people may not know what I know about World War II, having read about it so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back and started putting in some background so you would know what was going on in the rest of the war, how it gotten to that point. Uh, so the plot would make more sense that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, I hired a PhD student from the War Studies department at King's College in London to proof it, to fact check me. And because I wanted to get not only the technology right, the, the terminology right, but also the history. Now, I have opinions that I put in about some of the history.
Mm-hmm.
It's based on facts, but it's my opinion of how those facts actually played out.
Right.
Um, so as a result, it does I've had people tell me, one of the reviewers said, readers will wonder, there it is on the screen. Miller's scenes are so vivid, readers will wonder if they're reading a novel or watching a movie.
Right. The
And
independent book review. Yes.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so and that's what I wanted. And I was a little worried that, well, maybe I've gone over the top with the descriptions. And I did have an editor who cut some stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
said, killed one of my babies, but that's okay. I think he was right because there's a delicate balance between giving information and slowing down the action. So you have to weave it in a way that keeps you still tense, wondering what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why if it feels like you're reading a movie script, you are, or
Well,
watching a movie.
and that is enjoyable. And I, if I could just say, I think even folks who aren't well versed in the history of World War II and what happened during that time period, it is essentially a thriller. So even if you're not well versed in the historical part of it, you will enjoy this book anyway.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
It's also a love story. I tell people I describe it as, again, if I were doing a movie, Casablanca meets Das Boot.
Mm.
And so it's got the underlying romance wrapped around an action adventure during World War II with a bunch of history and technology in there. But really, at the heart, it's a love story.
I should have looked this up before we started recording tonight, but there was a movie that came out a few years ago with Tom Hanks as the captain.
Greyhound.
Yes, he's there. He's on an escort ship of a
Convoy.
convoy. Yeah.
Yep, yep. It That was based on C.S. Forester's novel, The Good Shepherd.
Hmm.
There'd already been a movie called The Good Shepherd, so they couldn't use that name.
Yeah, but as I'm reading this book, I'm sort of kind of reminded of that movie.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I actually, it's funny because I'm careful not to watch movies like Das Boot. I watched years ago, And that was one of sort of my original researches. But then I realized, they don't get everything right. It's kind of dramatized, so some of the technology or terminology may not be right. And I don't want to steal any of their scenes and get them in the book.
Right.
So I have not watched the Tom Hanks movie, and I hear he's making a sequel, which is great because I'm using a convoy in another book. So that
Well, if you
hopefully,
ever meet him, he should be your captain here, I think.
oh,
What
yeah,
what really reminded me of that movie Greyhound was the hunter and hunted
yes.
aspects that of this book.
Yeah, it's real cat and mouse. It's the hunter, uh, there, and then it turns out that the hunter becomes the hunted, and
Yes,
then
that's
they
what I
have
meant.
all
It's
all of
yeah,
these escapes that they have to get out of.
right. It's
Uh,
similar in that regard. Yes.
and hopefully, you actually feel kind of sorry or empathetic for the U-boat sailors, the life that they have to put up. I mean, they're just doing what they think is the right thing for their country.
Right.
Uh, which is again one of those moral issues. Where do you draw the line when you're doing your duty? And this book raises that issue.
Right.
Of,
I wanted to ask you, Mr. Miller, how much do you feel the character you initially develop dictates what happens in the book? Do you get me?
yeah, the actions do come from the character of both the protagonist and antagonist, from Captain Rogers and Captain Brower. Uh, they're things that motivate them based on the way they grew up, the way they've risen in the ranks. And so, yeah, I had to be careful that the actions they took remain true to their overall character.
Hmm.
It might get a little extreme, but I didn't want them to do anything that I couldn't base on something you knew about the character,
Hmm.
uh, or something that was revealed about the character,
Right.
either in some dialogue with other characters or the way people talk about them. Um, so I
Well,
wanted to go ahead.
I was gonna say, to what extent, once you breathe life into a character, to what extent does the character dictate what they do going forward as you're writing?
It's funny. Sometimes I'll sit down and have an idea for where the next scene is, and I'll just start typing, and then one character says something, and it leads into this, it leads into that.
Right.
This is the way this character would react, um, and it's just imagination. It's
Hmm.
very strange process. Some days it works, some days it doesn't. Um,
Yeah,
but
I've discussed books with a bunch of authors, and there is a common theme in that the character, after a while, dictates what they do in the book. It's almost like you're just a vehicle to express
yeah,
what they're doing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and what I typically do is I will try to work the characters into a corner and let them figure a way out, which
Right.
means I have to figure it out, but it has to be something they would know and do. Uh, so that means more research for me to figure that out.
But to me, it's a fascinating aspect of writing, which I'm not a writer, so I
Yeah,
am a reader. So I am fascinated by how that happens to
uh,
to the author.
yeah. The creative part is, I'd always um, grown up hearing stories from my parents and my grandparents. They would sit around at Christmas and try to outdo each other reciting poetry by memory and or tell stories. My one of my grandfathers was a journalist, and so he had some pretty crazy stories um, from his time. And I just learned to love stories, and I loved history.
Hmm.
And so um, when I sat down to write the novel, I started thinking about what was it I really liked about, say, the Masters of Rome series by Colleen McCullough, which I just adore that. Her writing's wonderful, her research is wonderful. Or Gore Vidal, who wrote Lincoln and Justine.
Mm-hmm.
and Burr. And what is it that they did that I enjoyed so much? So I tried to not write like them because I'm not that good, but to take lessons from how they described characters or how they developed a theme throughout or what bits of color did they put in and what did they leave out.
Mm-hmm.
Hemingway always said the most important thing is what you leave out. uh, I flunked that test, but I
Yeah.
put everything in.
And there's
uh,
a picture of him right on your page there.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
One
Do
of
you
my
have
heroes.
any well, this is relatively new release, correct?
Yes, it just came out November 1st.
Right. And
This
we'll
process is so long. I sold it 18 months ago, and it takes that long to get everything ready to be released.
hmm
And so
and
it's
Wonderkind is your publisher?
no, my publisher's Bancroft Press.
Oh, okay.
Wonderkind is my publicist.
Okay.
They handle publicity. Um, because there's so many books that come out, millions that come out that you can just disappear. Uh,
hmm
and I can look at my rank on Amazon or a friend's rank, and it'll be 800,000. You're the
Yeah.
800,000th
Yeah.
book. And
No, you can get lost in the shuffle, but
yeah.
let's hope this catches some wind because not to use a maritime pun, but I hope
Yeah.
it catches some wind because it really is a good read, and take it from someone who reads a book a month. Um, it's and none of them novels. Hardly ever do I read a novel, but this is incorporates so much history and factual knowledge that it makes it an easy read even for someone who doesn't generally read novels.
Good,
Yeah,
good. I
and I
appreciate that.
think anyone in our audience who likes thrillers, because in essence you say it's a love story, and then it is, but in essence it's a thriller. It's
Yeah.
you turn in that page to see what happens next.
And I deliberately do that
hmm
because I want the reader to keep going. So I'm going to work them into a corner. It's they're going to be hanging by their fingernails from the cliff or almost get killed, but then miraculously get away logically,
yeah,
and but then they're back in more trouble. And
yeah,
the other trick I learned in screenplay writing is that the troubles start to multiply and they get closer and closer together as the tension uh, steps up. It's like one of my favorite TV shows is Dexter. I don't know if you've ever watched it, but anyway, it's about a serial killer who kills serial killers.
mm,
And he's always within a hair's breadth of being caught. And it's brilliant the way they work that.
yes,
Um, it's or like the Bourne movies. He's always within a hair's breadth of being caught,
right.
um, and
Well,
there's
that
always
element
one
is in
more
this book.
obstacle he's got to overcome.
You do use that
So
technique
that's what
very
I
well.
like to read, and so that's what I tried to write.
Right. So, you say you love history. Is it centered around World War II essentially, or well, you did mention the Rome series also, but
Hold on, my computer is doing something stupid.
okay.
Okay, I'm back.
I was just asking. You said you love history. Do you center it around World War II, or?
No, actually, my if I had my choice, I would have written a book about ancient Rome.
hmm
As I mentioned, Colleen McCullough's 6 volumes, I think, of the Masters of Rome about Julius Caesar and before and after and Augustus Caesar. And I actually lived in Rome for almost 5 years. So I love that history. I've read a ton of Civil War history.
hmm
Uh, I love Bruce Catton. I don't know if you've ever read A Stillness at Appomattox.
Yes, I think I've read everything he's written.
Oh,
Catton, yeah.
his language,
hmm
his ability. And he was not a researcher. He had a researcher who did all that work, and then he just turned it into brilliant prose.
Yes.
Um, and there, I did read a lot of World War II, a lot of Civil War, a lot of ancient Rome, ancient history. I read a lot of that.
hmm
Uh, so as I said, I was surprised I ended up writing a novel about World War II, but it's the good thing I think for me is that it involves some areas of World War II that most people wouldn't know anything about,
Absolutely.
and I throw in some surprises that surprised me when I'm doing the research. I
Yeah.
kept going, what? I had
Mm.
no idea.
Hmm.
That can't be right. And so I
Yeah.
would do more research, make sure it wasn't just some blogger who got the history wrong. Uh, and then I would say, I've got to figure out a way to use this. This is too crazy.
Right. And you do bring attention to the plight of the Jew in Europe during that time
Yes.
frame. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, my publisher asked me, said, "Are you Jewish? You got so much details on it." I said, "Well, no, I'm my father's father was Jewish, but we've
Hmm.
all been raised Presbyterian, and I have Jewish relatives. But um, I've always felt a great deal of sympathy for them
Oh,
because
sure.
they're family, and again, some of the details about how they were treated in Holland uh, are even people who know history are surprised
Yeah.
because the the horror of the Holocaust wasn't just the concentration camps; it was the horror of everyday life.
Right.
As you know, each week or each month, one more right was taken away. You can't go to parks. You can't work in government. You got to wear J for Jew. You
Hmm.
carry a passport for B for bastard.
Hmm.
You you can't keep your money. You have to deposit it in this bank that
Right.
just happens to be run by the Germans. So slowly, everything about you is being taken away. And the Nazis were insidious in that in every country they occupied, uh, but more so in Holland than anywhere else, they had a Jewish council. They made the Jews rule themselves and pick the ones who had to leave and enforce the rules. And the theory was for a lot of the Jews was that, well, it can't get any worse, so we just need to obey, and they won't get any worse. Well,
Yeah.
it always got worse.
Yeah.
So
Well, that was the insidious tactic that was used
oh
by the Nazis back then.
yeah,
But it's funny you're expounding on that now because I did mention the Greyhound movie with Tom Hanks.
right.
It reminded me of that. But I guess because of the I hate to say the word cargo was a Jewish family, it sort of kind of reminded me of Anne Frank as well.
Yeah,
It did elicit that memory in my head too.
yeah, and um,
Maybe it
I
was because
just
from Amsterdam. I don't know why, but
no, that makes perfect sense.
yeah.
And I had just gotten back last month from France and Amsterdam and went through the Anne Frank house for the first time.
Hmm.
And I'm actually using more of that background in another novel, but uh, it uh, it was it was pretty terrible what they did.
Yeah. Well, you
And
did say another novel, and I know I'm eating up a lot of your time, and I appreciate it, but I did want to ask, do you have anything in the pipeline?
believe it or not, I have actually, and I surprised myself. I finished the sequel, and I'm working on the third, what may be the final volume. So I'm really juggling three different things. I'm publicizing my first book. I'm working with an editor on the second one, and then I'm writing the third one all at the
Right.
same time.
So it'll be a trilogy when it's done.
I think.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I know the beginning and the ending of each one, uh, but the endings are could be ambiguous.
Hmm.
So if I felt like there was more of the story to tell, um, so that means more research, more background, more discoveries of
Well, that's good for me, the end user, because I didn't want to say goodbye to the characters just yet.
yeah
So it
that
what it just I know you're in uh, in general terms, is it most of the same characters involved or
many of the same characters. Yeah.
okay, yeah,
Uh, so and because I like the characters now, so
yeah,
and I wanted to continue sort of their growth and their paths, and
Hmm.
so they can tell their stories,
Well,
which has been fun to dream up.
I'm glad you went to bed that night and had that dream because
Yeah.
what turned out to be a very nice book to read. And I'm like I say, I'm only in the middle of it, but I can't wait to finish it. This episode will air around Thanksgiving somewhere,
Okay.
and
Good.
I want people to know that are listening and also watching on YouTube that this is a brand new book. It only came out this month, November 2022, and just to prove it again, I have it right here. I'm
Good.
bringing it home right after this.
Yeah.
And what would be the best place for people to hunt for Peggy C? Where
Well,
can they get the book? Where would
uh,
you recommend they
and
go?
everywhere you buy books, it's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, Walmart. There's an Audible version. Um, I know it's in a number of actual bookstores. They still exist, particularly some of the small or independent bookstores. It's
Right,
available. So, or you could just go to my website and click on the Buy Here button,
right. Which will
and
be in the show notes, by the way. It's John Winn Miller.com. Very
yeah,
easy to remember.
yes,
WINN Miller.com.
and
And I do have your, I think I have the Amazon page somewhere around there. There it
yeah,
is.
that's it.
So you can easily buy it on Amazon. But I'll
Yeah,
say this, and I know people who regularly listen to this podcast are probably sick of me saying this every time I interview an author. But if you go to your local bookstore, even if it's a small bookstore, and you ask for this book, they will order it for you.
yep, they
So
will, and
I
it's
highly recommend that one of the things you do.
yeah, I would
Yeah.
encourage that because I'd love to support the local bookstores. Too
Yeah.
many of them have closed. I mean, I love Amazon, so I'm
Hmm.
not saying anything bad about them, but
Right. But I've
the
never heard where they wouldn't order a book. So if you go to your
true,
local bookstore and you're listening to us now and you want to pick up this book, drive over to your bookstore and say, "Can you order this for me?" And if they don't have it in stock, which they may, they will order it for you.
yeah. And you can also go to my website. You can read my bio, but you can also read the first chapter of the book
Right.
and see if it's your flavor. And there are a bunch of reviews from various review sites
Right.
that
What link would be the first chapter?
go up to the top.
Yeah, that's what I thought I was. Okay.
See right underneath the slide down a little bit. There's a gold button, and then underneath it is a black button.
Oh, read
Yep,
chapter one. Yes.
yep. So you
Well,
can,
the only reason why I wanted to show this to the folks is because it'll give you an idea of Mr. Miller's style, and
yeah,
it makes the reading very breezy. And again, take it from me, you'll be turning the page to find out what happens next.
yeah.
Yeah.
That
So
was
go ahead. I'm sorry.
that. I was going to say the first chapter was really fun to write
Hmm.
because again with them it's like a movie. You can't just jump into the action. You've got to sort of introduce the characters, got to sort of set up the scene, but you want to do it in a way that excites and entices you to keep reading, as you
Right.
said. So
Right. Right. Well, you did that very expertly. And
okay,
the reception to this book, and this is your first novel, but the reception is overwhelmingly positive that I can see between the
yeah,
Amazon reviews and the reviews that critics have written about it.
yeah.
So,
I've got critics and other authors who've written similar books who were kind enough to read it. They
mhm,
didn't have to say
right,
nice things about it. In fact,
right,
I, I couldn't tell them to do that. I just said, "Would you read it?" And many of them were very nice and agreed to do it and really liked it.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, it's an easy book to like, and I'm looking forward to watching the movie, Mr. Miller.
well, one of the reviewers said it needs to be a Netflix series, and my publisher's thrilled that I'm going to do a third book. He said, "Three? That's a series."
Absolutely, absolutely. And if they
That's
break the books down, yeah, you can make it a
yeah,
10-part series,
yeah. You
Keep
can,
those people coming back. What do they call that? Binge watching?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
binge watching. Yeah.
which I
Well,
do a lot of.
to my listeners, I'll say you'll be binge reading this because I can't praise it enough.
Well, thank you.
And I certainly do appreciate your time, Mr. Miller, tonight. Again, good luck with the book. I know it's only been out for 10 days or so as we're recording. But I really do hope it takes wind because I think a lot of people will enjoy it.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
and
very much.
and we'd love to have you back when you're ready for your
Yeah, absolutely.
second of the three to come out. I just want to maybe hopefully read this one in its entirety before, because I am looking forward to seeing what happens to these characters you've developed.
Yeah.
So, but thank you again, sir. It was really a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you
And
very much. It was a lot of
again,
fun.
good. Again, we'll hopefully see you a little further on up the road, lad.
Yep, I
All
hope
right.
so. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Bye.